For a great arcane mage, floating city is just the foundation of everything. The correct way to open it requires at least Advanced Arcane Council, StarCraft Dreadnought Battleship, Construct Magic Legion, Plane Fortress, Time and Space Barrier, Element Fusion Reactor, Anti-Material Missile, quotations from experienced gamers. For Brian, who travels through the world of the main material Torell. To rebuild a new arcane glory, his primary goal is to save his rear base, a small plane that is about to be destroyed by ancient monsters. Then, on the land of the Forgotten Kingdom, collect the lost color scrolls of the Arcane Empire, the 7 artifacts of the mechanical empire's Imaska, explore ancient lands, and countless lost magical civilizations in the depths of the multiverse. Keywords of the novel. Arcane Journey without pop-ups. Download the complete collection of Arcane Journey TXT, and read the latest chapters of Arcane Journey. Chapter 1. The Fatal Hunter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The Fatal Hunter. This is a handsome elf man with light purple eyes and platinum hair. In the dark and gloomy area, he curled up in a small iron cage with his hands clasped around his knees, his dull and hazy eyes filled with despair for the unknown nightmare. Zhuo wizard Jonah pulled up her cloak to cover her mouth and nose, strolling between the cages with light steps that made her slender legs visible through the thin veil. The high slit on the side of the gauze skirt that almost extends to the buttocks also exposes the black silk stockings on her beautiful legs. The top-level spider silk from the dark region is full of an indescribable beauty, making people feel the softness and smoothness of the stockings just from the oily texture of the black silk and the delicate lace texture. She was wearing an elegant black long dress, with a collar adorned with black pearls and exquisite spider embroidery, making the tight, boldly cut bra even more beautiful. At this moment, she stood by the cage of the handsome elf, with 2 deep red pupils flickering in the shadow of her hood, greedily hovering over him like demons. This is an elf from the Supreme Forest, the esteemed Lady Tux. A human businessman with a big belly limped out from the depths of a long tent, wearing a thick wolf fur jacket with fur edges and a pair of felt shoes. The merchant walked up to the wizard Zhuo and humbly bowed, pointing a gold-plated cane inlaid with amber gemstones at the handsome elf inside the cage, emphasizing, the elf royal family from the surface world. Upon hearing this, Jonah Tuck's deep red eyes flashed with a strange light. The Drow elves have an extraordinary hatred towards their surface relatives, and providing such a rare sacrifice in the ceremony would be a great honor for her. She carefully pondered for a moment before finally shifting her disappointed gaze away from the surface elves. Although destroying a surface fairy from the elf clan can give her unimaginable pleasure, what Jonah needs is a deadly sacrifice. He looks too weak. She turned eagerly to the next cage, inside which was a huge white-haired creature. Zadie bear people are a type of bear that inhabits dark areas. Their savage, cruel, and obedient personality, as well as their ancient hatred towards surface elves, make them the most loyal servants of the Drow elves. However, the expression of the Zhuo wizard was calm, just a glance, and he was too lazy to pay attention. Because this familiar creature couldn't meet her special requirements at all. She continued walking towards the next cage. This is a strong and beautiful dragon-like beast, quietly lying in its cage, folding its blood-red dragon wings on its back, and staring coldly at everyone outside the cage with the gaze of a predator. The scales of this dragon-like creature are dark black and about the size of an adult. However, unlike typical dragons that commonly have feline characteristics, this creature in front of us exhibits more wolf-like habits. Its lower jaw is longer than that of ordinary dragons, and it is more sturdy and powerful, indicating its strong biting force. Its thick and sturdy tail proves that it is an extremely important weapon in hunting. However, compared to its body shape, its wings appear to be somewhat underdeveloped, and the Zoroastrian wizard is even a bit worried about whether it can fly. This is the dragon beast, a terrifying and ferocious sub-dragon. The human merchant walked over with a big belly and boasted. It is a quite deadly dragon hunter, proficient in the innate spitting attacks of dragon creatures, and its fangs also contain deadly toxins. Most importantly, the velociraptor has a strong instinctive desire for human flesh. Of course, its recipe also includes drow elves, said the human merchant cautiously, afraid of offending the esteemed guests. Obviously, he also understood that when greeting women with special identities, they must always be cautious and careful. Janera carefully scrutinized the dragon warrior, gazing at the cold gaze burning with hunger and hatred. She nodded inwardly, but thinking of her long-planned plan, she immediately realized that this was not the ideal hunter. She disdainfully snorted and said with a mocking expression, "It can be seen that it has both wisdom and patience, as well as being very cunning, but after all, it is a head beast with limited intelligence. It also inherits the greedy nature of dragons' love for gathering treasure, which is the most fatal weakness. It is impossible to defeat my tribe, a cunning Zhuo wizard." In that case, it's a bit difficult. Noble lady, I'm afraid I'll find it difficult to meet the goods you requested. The human merchant cautiously flattered, attempting to quell her impending anger. After all, these inferior races cannot match the talent and power of your esteemed drow race. Janera calmly gazed at the human businessman, her gaze intriguing. Seeing the beautiful face of the wizard Zhuo gradually covered in cold frost, his slightly flustered eyes suddenly lit up, as if thinking of something, and he quickly said, "How did I forget about him? Please wait a moment. I have come up with a good hunter who may just meet all your needs." After speaking, he turned around and quickly disappeared into the depths of the tent. In no time, the merchant appeared in the sight of the Zhuo wizard. Following him were two burly and strong orc warriors. The young human man was escorted in the middle by them. It can be vaguely seen that these two ferocious and terrifying orc warriors with exposed dark yellow fangs deliberately kept a certain distance from their prisoners. A burst of surprise flashed in the eyes of the wizard Zhuo, who was gradually narrowing. She carefully scrutinized the prisoner in front of her, trying to hide the satisfaction and approval in her eyes, because if she was too interested, it would undoubtedly make the merchant raise the price. To be precise, this young captive is not a human, but a mixed-race elf. This is a half-elf with messy black hair, wearing a dusty coat and a severely damaged black cloak, dressed in a simple adventurer costume, but she vaguely feels a noble and elf-like elegance that belongs exclusively to surface humans. His facial contour is three-dimensional and profound, with clear edges and sharp edges, exuding resolute lines like knives and axes, while still maintaining the softness of the elf race. What truly left a deep impression on the Zhuo wizard were the black eyes of the half-elves, so deep that they seemed to see through everything, and shining as brightly as the black shining stones of the dark region. What she saw in those eyes shocked her even more, as it was filled with surprising intelligence, composure, and calmness. To confirm his thoughts, the Zhuo wizard lowered his gaze and looked at the hands of the half-elf captive. As she expected, his wrists were crossed and tied together. Witches are very familiar with this binding technique, as it is only necessary to take such precautions when dealing with the caster to prevent them from using gestures and spells to cast strong and powerful magic. The wizard extended a hand to gently stroke his crimson lips and prevented a smile from crawling up the corner of his mouth. "Wizards." She deliberately turned to the human businessman with a stern face, raising her eyebrows as white as her hair with a skeptical and inquisitive expression. "A wizard." The human merchant nodded affirmatively and added in an uncertain tone, more precisely, "It should be a combat mage from the kingdom of Kamel." The wizard looked at the merchant with suspicion. "I can assure you that he is a combat mage, esteemed lady." The merchant quickly explained, "I'm not quite sure if it's a combat mage from the kingdom of Kamel. I don't care what surface kingdom he comes from, I just want to confirm whether he is a combat mage or not," said the drow wizard in a low voice as he looked at the half-elf captive with interest. "Unbind him, I want to try his methods." As a drow elf, although living deep in the underground world, she also knows the surface kingdom above her city, living under the starry sky and sunlight, as well as her hands. The battle mages of the human kingdom of Khmer are renowned throughout the entire continent. They not only refine their spells, but also study close combat techniques. Moreover, among the battle mages of the Khmer royal family, there are also many war shapeshifters who are proficient in shape-shifting and can transform into giant beasts on the battlefield, becoming a cold and ruthless killing machine. The surface assault team of the Drow elves fears the Warmage Legion of the Khmer royal family the most. "Dear madam, are you sure you want to do this?" The human merchant tentatively said. Although his magic has been banned, his swordsmanship is no less impressive than any martial arts master. Without the blessing of magic, he killed more than 10 of my guards with just one sharp sword. Such a record may not be worth it. He doesn't have a sword, the wizard interrupted him in an unquestionable tone. In fact, she has her own plans. If the battle mage in front of her really dares to resist, she can take this opportunity to arrest him on charges of assault. In this way, she can save a lot of expenses. Similarly, if he can maintain a calm mind and choose not to resist, it indicates that this combat mage from the kingdom of Khamel is smart enough to complete her long-planned plan. So, now she just wants to see if the other party is as powerful as the businessman boasts. After all, what she needs is a deadly hunter who is cunning, quick-witted, and has enough understanding of magic. Moreover, she is also a wizard, a powerful wizard. She was not worried about the resistance of the prisoners at all, which was a kind of confidence in her own strength from the Takis family, Janera. The unsuccessful merchant shrugged his shoulders and snapped his fingers, quickly disappearing the magical rope that bound the half-elf captive. The half-elf captive slowly moved his fingers in an orderly manner, trying to make the blood flow faster. The 2 orc guards beside him looked panicked and kept a certain distance from him. The Zhuo wizard naturally noticed these details and looked at the calm and composed captive. Her sharp lips couldn't help but curl up a rare smile. She took out 2 cobra scales the size of a fingernail from the hidden pocket of her cloak. "Do as I say." The wizard showed the indifferent battle mage, slowly making this casting gesture while reciting a simple spell in a clear tone. As the scales of the cobra in the wizard's palm melt in the dark magical energy, a ball of rice-sized venom condenses and splatters onto the skin of the loath beast on the ground. The pungent toxin corrodes a large burnt mark at a visible speed to the naked eye. "Now it's your turn," the Zol wizard ordered as he threw the casting material. Cobra scales. Towards the half-elf. This is a simple, venom splash, trick she studied during her leisure and boredom, and she is curious about the power of this spell in the hands of a combat mage. The half-elf looked at her coldly, standing still like a stone sculpture cursed by a petrified lizard. As the casting material with curved lines rapidly descended, a nearly invisible light blue spell spiritual light suddenly floated over, and a semi-transparent light blue light surrounded the scales, trembling slightly in mid-air. The exquisite magical control ability secretly delighted the Zhuo wizard. She has had contact with many battle mages in the kingdom of Khmer, but she has never seen anyone who can skillfully cast a simple transformation spell. The battle mage slowly and carefully imitated the gestures and pronunciation of the Zhuo wizard. Floating in mid-air, scales surrounded by light blue light gradually melt away. A pool of venom shimmering with a faint green glow in the dim light appeared on the tip of the index finger extended by the half-elf captive, swaying like a candle. Accompanied by a strong acid-like pungent breath, it permeates the air, shimmering with the venom of a dark green light cluster, like an arrow shooting out of a string. "Ah woo!" A chilling roar came from behind the wizard. A dark green venom splattered onto the palm of an orc guard holding a curved knife, like black ink flipping over a sheepskin scroll. Starting from the orc's rough gray palm, it spread at a visible speed towards his entire arm. Pushi. The orc guards endured the excruciating pain, handed their swords to their left hand, and swiftly chopped off their right hand, successfully preventing the spread of toxins throughout their bodies. This battle mage from the kingdom of Khamel not only showcases the talent of the caster, but also possesses a cunning and cold mind. The drow wizard Jaranath smiles with schadenfreude. She hoped that his other abilities would also be as outstanding as his magical talent. She greedily looked at the half-elf captive, her beautiful face twisted with a smile. "What's your name?" she asked curiously, holding her chest in both hands as if she was about to burst out full. "Brian." The half-elf prisoner stared at her, his deep gaze surprisingly calm. "Very good." The Zhuo wizard smiled slightly and nodded in satisfaction. She didn't pay attention to the rude gaze of the half-elf, because she suddenly realized that she was enjoying the look of this cool-looking half-elf biting her teeth, yet helpless. "It's him," said the Zhuo wizard happily, meeting the gaze of the battle mage and making his own choice. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Personal Situation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Personal Situation. Manto dress is located in a vast natural cave in a dark region, which is the result of countless years of tireless water carving. The water here is alive. In this underground trading market shrouded in strange silence, the only sound is the sound of flowing water. Even with closed eyes, one can still feel the waterfall flowing deep into the cave, flying down from the high dome and splashing onto the cave walls. The murmuring stream flows through the cave, forming a small bubbling pond at every turn. Because Manto Dress is not a bustling market, but a dark place for secret transactions and shrewd negotiations. It's not crowded here, as can be inferred from the soft whispers and occasional low footsteps on icy roads. The maximum number of people in the entire cave is no more than 200. Taking advantage of the bargaining power between the drow wizard and the human merchant, the war mage captured Brian, who gained temporary freedom, walked out of the tent and stood at the door with a complex expression, surveying the surrounding environment. Although it is peaceful here, it is full of light. Due to the colorful crystals and gemstones set on the walls, a few dim candlesticks are enough to shine brightly throughout the cave. In this quiet underground trading market, there are magnificent stone buildings everywhere. The walls surrounding the fountain are adorned with gemstones, creating strange patterns. The crystal bridge spanning the stream is natural, and even the sidewalk is paved with polished jewelry. At this moment, he happened to be walking on a path paved with sparkling sapphires. Even though he was accustomed to the dazzling lights of bustling cities in the real world, now walking on such wealth again, he couldn't help feeling dizzy. He looked at the familiar scenery that seemed like a distant world, smelled the long-lost, damp and thick air full of mushroom breath, and sighed with emotion. Unconsciously, his mind recalled the life he had experienced as a guest from another world. As a gamer, inexplicably reborn into the gaming world, even though there is a faint sense of loss hidden deep within, he still believes that this is something worth celebrating. Who would have thought that when he adjusted his mindset and prepared to use the knowledge and foresight he had acquired in his past life to achieve his great ambitions, he realized that his rebirth was in a small world that was constantly being targeted by ancient evil creatures and faced destruction. Undoubtedly, this is not the world of Torell and the continent of Orence that he is familiar with. This was nothing, and what left him speechless was that this small world, which was extremely far from the main world, was still a genuine low demon world. Magic civilization was as rare as a few wisps of smoke remaining in the air. The constraints of rules and limitations of strength undoubtedly dispelled his attempt to quickly improve his own strength and then run away. In order to save his life, he had to find ways to delay the time when the evil creatures would destroy the world. In this way, we can have more time to think about ways to leave. Fortunately, this time the goddess of luck still favored him, and everything went smoothly as he had hoped. With his unremitting efforts, he not only gained the help of the will of the small world plane, but also successfully delayed the speed of world destruction. A spiritual sorcerer from the elven tribe worked together to obtain the coordinates to the main material world through a wizard tower left by the remnants of the Arcane Empire, and immediately went to find a way to save the world. After all, as a seasoned gamer, Brian also possesses lofty ideals and aspirations. After achieving his goal of conquering the world, he regarded this small world with abundant materials and resources as the origin of his own brilliant development of arcane skills, and naturally could not watch it be destroyed by ancient evil creatures. So, under the guidance of the spiritual sorcerer who mastered the abilities of the Star Trek, he set foot on the Star Trek passage to the world of Torell and the continent of Farron without hesitation. The Star Realm belongs to a nearly stagnant subspace and spiritual world in the multiverse, and even legendary powerhouses dare not easily step into it. Naturally, this trip could be described as heart-wrenching for Brian. They encountered StarCraft beasts that looked as long as fearless warships, escaped from StarCraft hunters who fed on the flesh of StarCraft travelers, and even witnessed the shadows of StarCraft dragons crossing the silver void with their own eyes. In this perilous journey, accidents still occurred. Brian and the accompanying psychic encountered a group of Githyanki people known as Star Pirates, and then the two separated. Without the guidance of a spiritual sorcerer, he relied on his blessed nature of the heavenly realm mountain to successfully attract the attention of a self-proclaimed Star Apostle, Asmo Saint, and took him to the crosswind fortress of the Ezeline Nebula. After tossing and turning all the way, he was once again transported to the dark region by an Asmo wizard with extremely unreliable teleportation spells. The result can be imagined. The unreliable teleportation spell landed him in a caravan heading to the underworld to sell slaves, and he was captured alive by a powerful figure at least 2 levels higher than him. Eventually, it evolved into the current situation. For his unknown fate, Brian had no choice but to make bold assumptions and try carefully, as the gap in strength lay there. Just like now, the drow wizard who bought him didn't worry about him running away. Because this is the most mysterious manto dress in the dark region, hidden 3 kilometers below the surface in a huge cave, protected by numerous magic, even stronger than a wizard's tower. Some powerful beings cannot find the location of this market through magic. The sturdy rocks surrounding the cave emit strange rays unique to the dark regions, and there is no magic that can penetrate. These spells are either weakened by scattering, or reflected back to the caster in their original form, and even pose a life-threatening threat. Therefore, any attempt to investigate the mysterious manto dress through magic is destined to end in failure or tragedy, let alone a fleeing prisoner. So, Brian is very aware of his own situation, and now he can only choose to endure humiliation and wait until he leaves this mysterious trading market, and then find an opportunity to find a way to escape. Thinking of this, he had a sudden thought and called up his own system panel. Name: Brian. Race: half-elf, Arthas elf bloodline. Attributes: physical fitness 13, strength 15, agility 17, intelligence 19, perception 16, charm 15. Occupation: level 6 warmage / part-time. Level 1 soul warlock. Ethnic characteristics: dim vision, elf lineage, wild mask, keen senses, spiritual talent. Professional characteristics of warmage: armored mage, spell sharpening, sharpening power, and spell distance enhancement. Spiritual warlock. Professional characteristics: mental resistance, psionic meditation. Spiritual realm, spiritual creation. A spiritual wizard who specializes in spiritual creation is called a creator. Instinct systems involve extracting interstellar matter or other substances from the star realm to create semi-solid or solid objects. The created objects can be weapons, armor, or interstellar structures that are commanded to fight by the creator. Creativity. Talent. Abilities: astral barrier, astral entanglement. General expertise: lightning reflexes, alertness, agile movement, combat casting. Personal expertise: magical talent, unforgettable memory, steel willpower. Super magic specialization: spell power. Warmage spell 7/7/6/4, 0 ring trick. Acid blast, strike dead, freeze ray. 1 ring spell. Secondary acid ball, secondary cold ball, secondary flame ball, secondary electric ball, secondary sound ball, arcane missile. 2nd ring spell. Explosive flame spell, ice blade spell, Mayofu's strong acid arrow, electric shock ring, and whirlwind blade. Triple ring spells: fireball, wind making, lightning beam, ice storm. Spiritual warlock power, spirit points. 8 points. Level 1 abilities: astral construct, spiritual secondary creation, star traveler, mind stinger, mind blank. This is his overall strength in a severely limited small world. Although not worth mentioning here, in the low demon world, there is a ceiling of combat power. The most crucial thing is that although the overall strength of this small world is low, there are many aspects that he deserves praise for, such as his elf bloodline. In the vast multiverse, there is not just one world like Torell. In the distant world of Adas, the harsh living conditions of the apocalypse make most of the creatures and races residing there possess the ability to unleash their spiritual abilities. And his elven lineage is exactly from the elven remnants of the world of Adas. Although the spiritual talents of these elven remnants from the world of Adas have been completely lost over time due to different living environments. But with the help of a psychic, Brian ultimately awakened his primitive spiritual talent within his body and took on the role of a psychic profession. However, Brian is still very clear about his situation. This seemingly luxurious attribute panel is actually not very helpful to him now. In the end, the levels of the two professions are too low for him to escape. His current strength belongs to the second level extraordinary, and the drow wizard who bought him, Brian speculates, is at least a fourth level exemplar. The difference between two levels makes it easy for the other party to grasp oneself. Moreover, the other party is still a wizard. In the world of high demons, the most difficult thing to deal with is the caster. So, without complete preparation, he really dared not try to resist to the death. Since he cannot escape with his strength, Brian has to use another advantage of his own. That is the ability of foresight that he, as a traveler, possesses. So he withdrew his chaotic thoughts and began to carefully analyze his own situation. From the conversation between the witch Zhuo and the merchant, he learned that the main purpose of the other party's purchase was to act as a deadly hunter. This reminded him of the tradition of the drow elves. Blood sacrifice. The blood sacrifice is a unique form of zodiac ritual. In this ritual, young drow elves hunt and kill a wise or dangerous creature, preferably from the land of light on the surface. For example, a surprise attack on the surface is one of the ways to complete this task. However, if there are suitable prisoners, such hunting is often carried out in tunnels in the dark wilderness. Remembering the solemn selection of the deadly hunter by the wizard Zhuo, Brian understood that he was the right prisoner. The reason why the drow wizard chose him is likely because he wanted to use the blood sacrifice ceremony in his hands to eliminate a drow elf who participated in this ceremony. Undoubtedly, this drow elf is likely a gifted descendant. After all, Najuan is the family tradition of these drow elves who believe in the spider god. Brian, who understood the reason, knew that his life should be temporarily at ease. Subsequently, he began to speculate which city in the underworld this drow wizard belonged to. He first excluded the most famous dark city of the drow elves in the underground world of the Northern Alliance. The city of Mossberry. Because during their conversation, he learned another piece of news. Zhuo wizards are very familiar with the surface of the Kamal kingdom, which means that their cities are likely to be located within the scope of the underground world of the Kamal kingdom. Brian quickly recalled the underground cities scattered throughout the kingdom of Kamal, valleys, and the Kosoman region. Quickly, he thought of three suspicious objects, namely the city of Skuntaline, the city of Sheamus, and the city of Gwelens. The city of Skuntaline is closest to the kingdom of Kamal, and he still remembers the royal forest within the kingdom, which hides a passage to the surface. From this time period, it seems that it has not been discovered yet. The city of Skuntaline was built on the ruins of the Kodao fish man, with a dense underground river that preserved the fish-like style of their buildings, similar to Venice in the real world. The food source of the drow elves is mainly algae and fish. However, Brian had carefully observed the drow wizard and found that whether it was her dressing style or the scent emanating from her surroundings, it was unlikely that she was a drow elf from the city of Skuntaline. As for the city of Sheamus, it is even more impossible. Because this is a city ruled by male wizards, male drow wizards have gained a numerical advantage through consecutive generations of high birth rates, gradually reducing the number and power of drow elf mothers, and ultimately gaining absolute control. The queen of the spider god, the priestess of the drow, only plays a secondary role, which is undoubtedly very rare in the underground cities of the drow elves. Shema City was once jokingly claimed by players that male wizards must have defeated women and successfully ascended to power by studying chromosomes. A Zhuo city defeated by chromosomes. Brian once doubted whether a wizard had invented a magical potion. After all, the right to decide whether to have a boy or a girl, whether to plant beans or melons, really depends on the man, not the woman. It is precisely because of this special situation that the male wizards in Shema City prohibit any female drow from learning magic, so it is naturally impossible for such a powerful drow female wizard to appear. In that case, it is highly likely that the wizard Zhuo came from the city of Guolens located near the Sunset Mountains, Brian thought to himself. If that's the case, his chances of successfully escaping have increased by at least half. The city of Guolens is the oldest city of the Drow elves, dating back 10,000 years to the early rise of the Drow civilization. However, these are not important to Brian. Because if nothing unexpected happens, this city is very likely to be completely destroyed one day in the future. Brian has witnessed the process of the destruction of the city of Old Orleans through various channels and information. The real trigger was the deity of the Drow elf faith. The spider god Queen Rose, who attempted to elevate from moderate divine power to powerful divine power, leading to a brief slumber. During the period of slumber after the spider god, all the Zhuo priestesses in the dark region lost their ability to release divine spells, and most of the unprepared priestesses fell into panic. As a result, it can be imagined that countless oppressed male drows have rebelled, whether in physical posture or sitting position in power, all wanting to occupy the upper hand. The most tragic one among them is the city of Guolens. This ancient city was pulled to the material plane by a crazy drow wizard through some evil sacrificial ritual, who brought many demonic monarchs from the bottomless abyss to spawn the drow elf dungeon of Old Orleans. Among the demonic monarchs that Brian is familiar with, there are at least the undead Lord Orcus, the king of the jackal, the king of the dark Lord Gladster, the fungal queen Zugmoy, as well as the king of the mud monster, the phantom demon king, the horned demon king, and so on, and even many others who cannot even name him. After all, the divine kingdom of the spider god queen is located in the bottomless abyss. If she really succeeds in being promoted to a powerful divine power, her demon neighbor will be the first to suffer. The improvement of strength, along with it, is definitely a territorial expansion that matches one's own strength. Judging from the current situation, there should still be a few years left until the incarnations of the demonic monarchs are used as dungeons to brush the ancient city of Orence. The reason why Brian hopes to be in ancient Orleans is mainly because he is most familiar with the drow elves in this city, and the difficulty of escaping should be relatively low. He was pondering his escape plan while recalling the lost ruins of the floating city in the dark region, as well as the specific location of the Nazriel survivor, Ialem, who claimed to have a challenge level of up to 68. Because the ruins of the floating city have not yet been discovered, he can take this opportunity to take away a color-resistant scroll inside. A key item in his plan to advance to the arcane profession. If fortunate enough to find the echo chamber of Ialem, I would use my foresight to confirm an immature guess with him. Of course, the prerequisite for all of this is to first rid oneself of the status of a captive. At this moment, he could only pray in his heart that the destination he was heading to was the ancient city of Orence, the drow elf. Otherwise, after leaving Manto Dress, he could only grit his head and risk his life to escape from the hands of a fourth-order wizard. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Ancient City of Orence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Ancient City of Orence. In the nests adorned with rare treasures and winding tunnels, in the roaring waterways and huge caves, the creatures of the dark regions have established their homes. Among countless beautiful and dangerous underground kingdoms, the most beautiful and dangerous is the dark city of the drow elves. After a journey of half a month, Brian, as a prisoner, arrived at the once familiar city of the drow. The city of ancient Orence, under the guidance of a group of drow elf warriors and the guidance of a drow wizard. With the help of soft magical radiance, he gazed at a finely crafted arch. Behind the arch, 2 giant spiders quietly arched the area. The familiar scene reminded him of some detailed information about the race with the most severe internal competition. He had to think about it because it was the key to his survival. He must seek a glimmer of vitality in the chaotic rules of the drow elves. Living in the city of the drow elves, the spider god Rose, the god of chaos worshipped by the drow elves, incites endless chaos and engages in endless struggles for power and status to please herself, prevent complacency and uncontrolled pride from breeding, or avoid the rise of hostile beliefs. The drow elves here, whether noble or commoner, live, work, plan, entertain, and love each other. The only thing they share with their surface relatives is the exquisite craftsmanship in the art, armor, and decoration prevalent in family buildings and public places. Like elves living on the surface, they have astonishing similarities in their knowledge of magic and art, as well as a strong sense of pride in their own combat skills. However, for the drow elves, their innate elegance and excellence have been twisted into a terrifying resemblance to their ancestors, distorted by countless years of hatred and isolation, and transformed into the shocking elegance and extremely cold-blooded brutality of today. Before a pair of malicious gazes fell on him, Brian quickened his pace and walked towards the city amidst a group of shaky dog-headed slaves. Because in recent days, there has been a drow warrior who has been watching him in the dark, trying to find his trouble, and he has to be cautious. He walked on the wide streets adorned with stone art and magic, with countless dim lights permeating the street view composed of exquisite buildings and luxurious shops. The colorful and dazzling light is an innate talent of all drow races. Demonic fire. The shop owners on the street use tempting demonic flames to light up their shop signs, just like billboards in the real-world night scene, attracting customers to buy and sell their products. In the blacksmith shop not far away, the surface dwarves bound by chains muttered in incomprehensible dwarf language. Under the urging of 2 fully armed drow warriors, they repaired exquisite weapons and jewelry for their master. 2 burly and muscular Tauran warriors act as guards in front of an extremely tall and magnificent mansion. They stand face to face on both sides of the gate, with long curved bull horns forming a deadly arch. A group of small goblins hid in the narrow stone pits of the street, their narrow little eyes flickering with a faint red light, constantly scanning the street eagerly. Occasionally, there will be a mouse like a street mouse rushing out, hastily picking up the garbage on the ground, or shoveling away the feces left by underground lizards, and quickly disappearing into the shadows. This is the task of goblin slaves, to keep the streets of Old Orleans spotless, and their loyalty to duty is guaranteed by an ogre holding a whip and a hard-headed hammer. At this moment, the streets of the city of Gualens were bustling with crowds of drows coming and going. The richly dressed nobles leisurely strolled through the wide streets and alleys, casually scanning shops, or resting in fashionable taverns while sipping the sparkling and mellow wine in glass-tall glasses. The city guards rode on armored underground lizards, patrolling in an orderly manner. Zhuo merchants beat up camel beasts resembling lizards and sent their goods to the bustling market. As they arrived, Brian saw the surging crowd on the street quickly separate, making way for the drow wizard Janera sitting on a magic-driven floating saucer ahead. She lifted her chin high, as if silently demanding that everyone immediately show respect for her. The fact is exactly so. On the streets, whether it is the drow elves, or the underground dwarves, they all nod or bow according to their own status. Just as the noble drow wizard was about to drift across the street, intoxicated by the respect and jealousy she deserved, a goblin immersed in clearing the dung of underground lizards ignored her passing. Faced with the goblins ignoring her, a wave of anger flashed through the gradually narrowed eyes of the drow wizard Janera. Her face suddenly changed from imperial arrogance to extreme anger. In fact, in Brian's view, this goblin slave did not actually block the other's path, but its negligence clearly lacked respect for the wizard. This situation, whether on the surface or in the underground world, being ignored by a slave is intolerable to most nobles. The only difference is their different ways of venting anger. He saw the wizard drow driving his float towards the goblins. When the shadow of the float fell on the goblin busy cleaning up feces, the little one impatiently hummed and looked up. From its widened pupils, it could be seen that it had seen death approaching, so frightened that it could not move, like a mouse under a cat's paw. The Zhuo air wizard extended his slender fingers towards the trembling goblin. Accompanied by a fast and low singing, a group of tiny spiders that made people's scalp tingle rushed towards the goblins like ant colonies. They run and grow at a speed visible to the naked eye until they reach the size of a fist, and then swarm onto the goblins. In the blink of an eye, the little spider drained the victim's flesh and blood, turning it into a pile of rags, bones, and rough skin. The Zhuo air wizard snorted coldly and led the family guards and slaves forward. Seeing this situation, Brian, who was among the slaves, slowed down and took a few more glances. "What are you staring at? Let's go, the hybrid fairies on the surface." At this moment, a drow warrior wearing shining armor and a magic cloak quickly approached him and punched him in the stomach, shouting fiercely. Brian didn't resist, he just gritted his teeth and tightened his abdominal muscles to resist, but the punch still hurt and he gasped for breath. He lifted his head, suppressed his anger, and looked at the back of the drow warrior who always liked to deliberately pick faults all the way, his cold gaze as if looking at a corpse. He stabilized his mind while walking, silently observing and calculating the footsteps of the Zhuo warrior who had just punched him. When the other party was about to pass by the body of a goblin with only rags and bones left, he concentrated and his mind moved. Level 1 Psionic Power. Starry Entanglement. A small clump of star-like energy, the size of a palm, appeared precisely under his control on the foot of the drow warrior about to fall, and disappeared in the moment the opponent stepped on it. Stepping on smooth stellar energy. The careless Zhuo airwolf stumbled and swayed his body twice to stabilize, but accidentally stepped on a small spider hidden in a rag, still wriggling and sucking on flesh and blood. This greedy little spider made a nauseating popping sound, splashing pus and goblin fluids onto the body of the drow warrior. The sound of trampling and exploding was very subtle, but still sensed by the drow wizard John Era walking at the forefront. "This is blasphemy." John Era, sitting on the magic float, turned around and looked at the little spider that had been trampled to death, her face twisted with rage. She pointed to the drow warrior of the initiator and shouted in a voice full of power and magic, "Blaspheme the creation of the goddess, according to Rose's law, execute immediately." Two drow warriors dressed in the same attire descended upon them like ghosts, and cleanly drew out their sharp long swords and curved swords. A blade of lightning struck the Zhuo airwu from the right side and tore open his stomach, while another curved blade instantly cut open his throat. The attack is extremely smooth, without any dragging or dragging. The Zhuo, who had ended the sanctions, immediately put away his sharp blade and walked forward shoulder to shoulder, letting his companions' corpses lie in the expanding pool of blood. The whole street became deathly silent. Following the footsteps of the team, Brian stepped on the right hand that had just punched him on the corpse and silently left. Undoubtedly, the worship of the Spider Queen by the drow elves of the city of Gornis is deeply rooted, and any intentional or unintentional blasphemer will face a fatal judgment. Not long after the group left, the onlookers on the street gradually turned their attention back and were busy with their own affairs. A group of goblins, carrying mops and buckets, hurriedly cleared the bloodstains and corpses on the ground under the loud whip of the ogre. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. HalfLife Food. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 HalfLife Food. Your Excellency, if this is the delicacy you first fell in love with, then your taste is really amazing. A short half-figure smiled in a professional tone and said, "The three-layer mushroom is one of the most precious and elegant plants in the darkness of the dark region. Only the dwarves of the distant city of Brindon Stone know the secrets of its cultivation and preparation. Traditionally, the rhizomes of the three-layer mushroom fungus can be washed, soaked, and dried to make delicious sponge-like bread, which is the most popular practice in the market of Old Orleans. However, what you will never find in the market is the 3-layer mushroom noodle dish, which is reserved for you as an underground dwarf. So its name is Sneebreeze 3-layer Boletus 1000-layer. Brian looked at the short and chubby half-body standing in front of him with great interest. The half-figure smiled, with his slightly gray long hair curled up around his ears, level with the elegant and smooth neckline. Even in this enclosed stone chamber with only a few ventilation openings, as a prisoner, he wore carefully cut expensive clothing. Anyone can tell at a glance that this is a half-body person who knows how to enjoy life. Because half-bodied people are inherently a comfortable race with a strong love for peace, tranquility, fireplace, home, and most importantly, food. In stark contrast to humans, these simple pleasures are the only ambition of this unique and ambitious team. Whether living in the luxurious life of a half-body cave amidst lush rural scenery, or on a bumpy adventure, or even serving as a slave, the half-body still constantly alternates between the two emotions of food. Tasting and craving. Because of this, half-bodied slaves are the best treated in the drow cities of the dark regions, often cherished as servants. Brian turned his gaze to the abundant food placed on the stone table. Now, as a slave, he has been in the city of Old Orleans for almost 2 months, staying in this enclosed stone chamber from beginning to end, never leaving for more than half a step. Fortunately, his treatment is quite good. The wizard Zhuo arranged for him to have a skilled half-body servant, who could almost enjoy the rich wine and delicious food. The most crucial thing is that he still systematically learned magic knowledge about the dark regions here. For him, this special opportunity is simply something that can be encountered but not sought after. If it weren't for worrying about his future fate, Brian would really want to stay for a while longer. However, with continuous learning, he has clearly felt that the impending fate is rapidly advancing. After all, out of his understanding of the evil race of the Drow elves, he understood that the better treatment and attention he received, the more dangerous the role he would play in the future. "I just casually said, I didn't expect you to actually make it," he said casually as he looked at a bowl of food on the table that was very similar to spaghetti. This extraordinary noodle dish is made by grinding the roots and stems of nutty 3-layer mushroom into powder, filled with artificial vegetable stew made from the top of this rare plant. This was a bowl of food that moved him a lot, with the only flaw being that the bowl used to hold the food was only the size of a palm. "Janara's mistress has instructed me to do my best to meet your requests, as long as they are made by you." The half-figure still smiled, but his tone of voice deliberately increased, as if there were some hidden mysteries in his words. Upon hearing this, Brian's expression moved. He recognized that the other person had something in mind and smiled. "Thank you for your help, Elton. You have allowed me to taste the long-awaited delicacy." After speaking, his mind moved and a small bowl the size of a palm flew into his hand. "Then, concentrate again and unleash the power of secondary creation that you have mastered." Secondary creation techniques. For wizards, it is a spell system that requires at least the ability to release the 4-ring spell in order to master. However, in the hands of spiritual sorcerers who are proficient in creation, they are only the lowest level of spiritual power. The fundamental reason is that the spiritual sorcerers of the creation series have the means to extract interstellar energy from the star realm, without the need for wizards to prepare complex casting materials. The so-called star realm is somewhat similar to the universe and starry sky in the real world. It is said that the origin of all matter in the multiverse was born in the interstellar realm. At first, Brian didn't quite understand this viewpoint, but since he mastered the knowledge of the creative world of psychics, he vaguely felt that there was still some basis for this statement. Because creative psychics do not need to prepare expensive and complicated casting materials when creating things out of thin air, the only thing they need is the stellar energy or crystals they extract from the star realm. Just like the spiritual power he is currently using, accompanied by a light blue light surging in his palm, in the blink of an eye, 2 slender crystal chopsticks appeared in his hand out of thin air. Brian slowly digested the food in the bowl under the surprised gaze of half-body Elton. Although he has been immersed in learning magic knowledge for the past 2 months, it does not mean that he has not considered his own situation and methods of escape. And the half-body servant in front of him was one of the stages in which he pondered his escape plan. This is the good relationship he formed with the other party after multiple tests and verifications. Although the small task of asking a half-body person to help him may not have much effect on the current situation, he believes that there is no risk and may need it at some point. However, Brian was worried that the wizard's drow elf Jonera would be secretly monitoring his every move, so he could only choose to use very subtle words to communicate messages with the half-human servants. Just now, the two of them seemed to be discussing food, but the real meaning was that Elton conveyed to him that he had successfully completed the entrusted task. "Sir, you can try this again." Half-body Elton saw Brian finish eating and immediately pointed to another dish, playfully blinking his eyes and introducing it with a smile. "If you have ever followed a caravan or traveled around the Sword Bay area, you must know that to the east of Bode's Gate, 2 months away, is a half-human town surrounded by city walls. So you are likely to miss out on this real town completely, because when the quaint countryside houses are connected by narrow paths, the entire ground appears crowded, so most of the town's buildings are built in spacious cellars. These cellars can extend to 3 underground floors, where half-human residents connect all the tunnels of the underground passages, and then operate shops and hotels in these comfortable, fireplace-covered underground spaces. There, you will find the town's most unique cooking. Crispy fried cheese bread paired with chubby tomato broth. Upon hearing the half-body's incessant words, Brian pretended to be very interested and listened, searching for information in his lengthy words. Until the other person finished speaking, he looked at them thoughtfully, secretly remembering Bode's Gate and Zildjian, and then turned his gaze to the food with a string of stinky and long names. Obviously, the half-body Elton helped him with a small matter, and if he had the chance to escape, he would also need to fulfill a small request from the other party. In fact, he is quite familiar with Zilv town and has had the privilege of visiting the underground tavern of the half-man to taste delicious food. I was also fortunate enough to taste Elton's mention of crispy fried cheese bread paired with chubby tomato broth. Half-bodied people not only know their cheese, but also know countless ways to cook cheese. Bread coated with cream and topped with a layer of cheese strips, sprinkled with seasoning, then deep-fried, then cut into strips or soaked in soup. These sandwich breads are sometimes accompanied by a spicy flavor, and depending on the chef's mood, they are often sprinkled with dill, nutmeg, basil, etc. The same goes for the accompanying soup, usually large chunks of tomatoes, but occasionally smooth red chili paste. It always stays warm and acts like a dipping sauce. Once the cheese melts perfectly in the soup, it can be easily consumed. Crispy fried cheese bread is one of the most distinctive recipes for half-bodied people, and it is very popular around the world in Jianwan. Thinking of this, he showed great interest and picked up the spoon to savor it with relish. Seeing Brian's expression change, half-body Elton smiled and bowed as usual, silently leaving the room. Brian has long been accustomed to this situation. When he finished enjoying the delicious food brought by the half-body, as usual, he picked up a magical book called 7 Changes in Shadow Energy again, and with the help of the light of the candle, carefully studied and read it. In the past 2 months of study, he not only learned the basic principles behind the release of spells by these drow wizards who often live in dark regions, but also learned 2 relatively practical low-level spells based on his own knowledge. They are the 2nd ring protection spell, Magic Field Backfire, and the 3rd ring curse spell, Mucus Swallowing. The former can cause the target to be backfired by their own spell when casting spells, while the latter summons a soft mud monster, devouring body with a challenge level of about level 5 to assist in battle. As a wizard, he knows very well that the truly powerful spellcasters are not how many spells they have mastered or how many powerful magical equipment they possess, but how many unknown and peculiar spells they have developed. Because during battles, if one follows the spell list commonly used by spellcasters to duel with others, it is easy to be targeted or counteracted by various flashy counter spells. For example, from the moment you raise your hand to sing and prepare to release the fireball technique. Some experienced spellcasters will instantly judge the power, flight speed, and trajectory of the fireball through the surging arcane energy in the air, and then think of countermeasures and counterattacks at the fastest speed. Relatively speaking, if the caster releases an extremely unfamiliar and unknown magic. So when the enemy is dealing with it, they not only cannot understand the function of spells in the first place, but also need to spend more time to judge the characteristics of spells based on their own mysterious knowledge. In this case, it is impossible to quickly come up with the simplest and most effective defense method. So, the well-known spells mastered by spellcasters are generally used to deal with non-spellcasters who are not very familiar with spells. When facing off against a true spellcaster, using these well-known spells can easily have the opposite effect. This is also the real reason why it is difficult for the casters of their player community to benefit from the hands of indigenous wizards. Because of this, as a spellcaster, Brian always tries every means to learn or research magic that belongs exclusively to him. He was also aware that the drow wizard Joranna was providing him with delicious food and drink, allowing him to do everything possible to understand the true purpose of learning drow magic. After all, his opponent is a gifted drow wizard, how can he do it without some preparation? Thinking of this, his mind quickly recalled a young witch named Zhuo whom he had met in the city of Old Orleans. No matter how strict a society is, there will always be one or two deviants from the norm. Recalling this sentence, Brian vaguely speculated that his opponent might really be the strange and unconventional Zhuo. He knew if that's the case, he feels that if he chooses to confront it head-on, his chances of survival are slim. In this case, he had to change his originally planned plan. Whether it's her or not, it's always right to be prepared, he comforts himself in his heart. What are you afraid of? Suddenly, a cold voice without warning came from behind. Brian, who was lost in thought, looked surprised and instinctively turned to face the drow wizard Joranna Tux. He sat in a chair, put down the magic book in his hand, looked up slightly, met the wizard's crimson gaze, and realized that his comfortable learning career was probably coming to an end. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Conspiracy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Conspiracy. The expression of Zhuo wizard Joranna Tux was as cold as frost, as proud as the melting snow on the mountaintop, but the signal emitted by her clothing and attire was so hot that it seemed to make people feel hot at first sight. Of course, as a prisoner, Brian cannot get hot at this time. Because in his eyes, this creature was no different from a poisonous spider. When he imagined the other person to be a spider, he instantly felt as if he had been splashed with cold water. He quickly got up from the chair and gazed calmly at the drow elf. She looks very young, but her crimson eyes are already mature enough. Her chest was towering and angry, and the skin exposed outside her clothes was still as tight and elastic as a young girl. Her slender and straight legs were close together, tightly packed without any gaps. But Brian could feel that the mature charm naturally emanating from the wizard Zhuo was not something that young girls could imitate. After all, a female drow who has lived to this age is not an experienced veteran driver that countless players cannot match. He also heard some players with a bad taste explain that if you want to confirm the condition of a female drow's car, just look at her. At the thought of something interesting, Brian looked surprised and quickly dispelled the chaotic thoughts in his mind, because he was really afraid that he would suddenly lose his composure in such an occasion. If he laughed, it would be a bit awkward. Although he knew that his life was not in danger for the time being, he still dared not be so reckless. Fortunately, the other party did not notice his changes, just stood quietly, looked at him coldly, without any words or actions. Brian regained his composure and, with the corner of his eye, gazed at the still uncovered body of the drow wizard's light silk robe, then deliberately flashed a greedy expression while making his breathing slightly faster. There's no way, in this situation, he has to pretend. Otherwise, this female drow who feels good about herself may come up with some torture method when she finds herself so unattractive in her own eyes and becomes angry and embarrassed. If he pretends to be extremely patient but unable to anticipate the urgency, it will cause the other party to experience inexplicable pleasure and a satisfying desire to conquer. As long as this psychologically abnormal joueur is happy and produces a pleasant sensation, he will naturally not find trouble with him. So it is not without reason to say that life is all about acting. Especially Brian, who is currently a prisoner. I can tell, said the wizard joueur. You're doing well. She walked leisurely to the chair where Brian had stood up and sat down calmly, letting her long silk skirt slid up to her hips, revealing her slender thighs. Brian stood in place with his back straight, maintaining a cold silence as usual, while exuding an irresistible murderous aura. You will soon have an opportunity to test your own strength, said the wizard, taking out a small bottle of potion from his full chest and showing it to him with a sarcastic smile. If successful, I will set you free. Brian widened his eyes in cooperation, clenched his fist, then let go, with a flicker of contemplation, eagerness to try, and finally converging in his gaze. Then he followed the bottle of potion in the wizard's hand with a fervent and eager expression, watching as the other person stuffed it back into their intimate bra. You can see what this means. The witch looked at Brian with silky eyebrows and eyes, licked her crimson, plump lips, and teasingly asked, So, do you want to know how to get it? State your purpose, Brian said coldly in a deliberately angry tone. As expected, seeing his own expression, the other person's smile became even more apparent, filled with mockery. Although the joueur wizard did not ban his casting ability, he used another means to control him. The flaunting potion in her hand was to relieve a vicious curse called the poisonous heart spider, in his body. I have designed an interesting adventure for you. And all you need to do is help me kill someone in this adventure game, said the wizard with a smile, his slender legs overlapping. I need to know the specific situation, Brian answered briefly, praying in his heart not to be the rebellious drow he knew. Of course, in order for the plan to succeed, you must have a detailed understanding of your opponents. To be precise, I am not the head of the Tux family, but a magic mentor responsible for training the family's own and some children with magical talents who have been sent to me, said the wizard with a light frown, as if recalling something unpleasant. The Tux family, as Brian naturally knows, is the first family in the entire Old Orleans city. That's why. The wizard said with a proud expression, any apprentice wizard who comes from my hands can earn the highest credit in the annual competition held to inspire young drools. In this way, they can easily pass the tests of the Sorcerer Academy, open this mysterious magic door, and pursue their own path of magic. Such high teaching quality is an honor for you, Brian added appropriately. That's right. Upon hearing his flattery, the wizard joueur was clearly well received, but equally, it is this noble reputation that has brought me new trouble. Brian looked at her curiously, and he vaguely guessed the reason behind it. 10 years ago, I received a new student, a girl with a rare magical talent. The voice of the wizard joueur was mixed with pure hatred. As a wizard mentor, receiving a girl with a rare magical talent is not something worth celebrating. Brian deliberately showed a puzzled expression. If it were in our war academy in the kingdom of Kamal, it would almost elevate a mentor's reputation to a new level. That's all, the wizard said coldly, but the mistake is that this girl is the only daughter and heir of the chief wizard of the ancient city of Orence, Hadrop Pumor. The only heir? Brian asked in confusion. If you claim to have trained the successor of the next chief mage of Old Orleans City, wouldn't this title bring you unimaginable prestige? It seems that you are very clever. You can explain the key point with just one word. The wizard lifted his chin, his crimson eyes fixed deeply on Brian for a long time, and coldly explained the reason. However, the great wizard Hachdorf insisted on keeping this arrangement confidential. Upon hearing this, Brian looked at the drow with a strange expression. After working for a while, it was because the students I taught couldn't say their teacher's name, and the teacher couldn't pretend to be coerced, so they had to find ways to kill their own students. Truly worthy of being a drow, it has already become so internalized, Brian thought to himself. With this in mind, Brian felt that the whole thing might not be as simple as he thought, so he said again, yes, as a mentor, I can't go around boasting about my new students. It's really a bit cruel. This is just one aspect of the reason. The drow, to Brian's surprise, did not refute the sarcasm in his words. Instead, he sighed and said in a tone of frustration, "The real reason is that this child's magical talent can no longer be considered rare." "May I hear its details?" Brian's eyelids twitched because he had guessed it right. His opponent was really the rebellious Zhuo wizard. The Zhuo wizard adjusted his sitting posture, swapped the overlapping long legs, and glanced at Brian, who was secretly swallowing saliva, revealing a twisted smile. Generally speaking, the learning of magic by a drow begins in adolescence. A noisy and confusing transition from childhood to youth. This period begins around the age of 15 and ends at adolescence or 20.5. By then, a drow child is strong enough to try to guide the power of magic, receive sufficient education, and read and write complex drow scripts. However, this child is different. When most children begin to feel the power of magic, she is already able to freely control her innate magic. Not only that, she can also read Zhuo's runes. More importantly, she possesses the necessary talent to transform from a drow who can use magic to a true wizard. In a short period of time, this little one learned to read simple magic scrolls, copy mysterious runes, and memorize quite complex spells. Not only did she surpass my proud daughter in her abilities, but she also mastered magic that even low-level wizards couldn't perform at a speed that exceeded everyone's expectations. What's most frustrating is that she stood tall and graceful, displaying the extraordinary beauty that was predicted in her childhood. Even our family's martial arts experts were fascinated by her. Therefore, I plan to use her coming-of-age ceremony to end her education once and for all. Zhuo wizard Joranna Tux finished speaking in a vented breath, her full chest fluctuating frequently, revealing the purest hatred she had developed due to jealousy. Brian remained silent and did not answer. He knew that the drow was a narrow race, had no doubt about the superiority of his own race, had an extremely fanatical admiration for Rose, and enjoyed the struggles and conspiracies encouraged by this chaotic lady. Status is everything, striving for power and profit is everything. Few can divert the gaze of the drow elves from the narrow focus passed down from their generation. So, the twisted side exhibited by the drow wizard in front of him was a normal operation for the drow elves, and it did not refresh his three views. This witch, in order to quell the anger caused by jealousy in her heart, spared no expense in personally weaving a web full of conspiracies. Of course, in his view, the real reason is likely to be the future of the girl, which will shake the position of the first family of Tux. In summary, many reasons have built the motivation to kill her, and this is the characteristic culture of the drow elf. The art of involution. And he, in this woven spider web, became a tool to kill that girl, that's all. She really looks up to me, Brian showed a bitter smile. As a traveler, he happened to know this gifted Zhuo girl and naturally knew the general situation of her blood sacrifice ceremony. Undoubtedly, from the fact that the other party survived unscathed and became a legendary level drow wizard, it can be inferred that Janara's plan was clearly a failure. Not only did he fail, but he was also severely beaten in the face. In fact, if everything goes according to Janara's design, her plan can actually be successful. But the mistake lies in the fact that the father of this girl is the chief mage of the ancient city of Orence. This cunning old wizard can give her any powerful magical equipment and directly strike her with a dimension reduction blow, turning the entire dangerous ritual into a perfunctory process. The fact is that the plot developed according to this, so Brian felt that he had no chance of winning at all, and it was like going to die. What is her name? He remained silent for a long time, holding on to the last glimmer of hope. Santila Pumor, replied the drow wizard, whose anger had finally subsided. What's the difference between this and dying? Brian muttered in a slightly depressed voice. Are you an idiot? Upon hearing this, the wizard Zhuo suddenly jumped up from her chair with an unusually fierce expression, and an angry red flame flashed through her eyes. You must win, otherwise what would I have put in so much effort for? You already have a sufficient understanding of Zhuo's spells, so in the next month, Janera tried to restrain her anger and said with a very serious expression. My daughter, Sandilla's closest friend and the person who knows her the most, will be with you every day, telling you all the attack magic your opponent has mastered and how to resist it, as well as her weaknesses. If you want to survive, you must carefully master all of them. It's useless, Brian thought to himself. I understand. He regained his composure and nodded slightly. He has heard of the malicious curse of the poisonous spider, but if it doesn't work, he chooses to run away during the duel. As for the issue of curses, he can't afford to transform them into witches. Of course, this is the worst-case plan he made without any way out. I can tell that you are a quick-witted and intelligent combat mage, Janera said with an evil smile. So, you should know the consequences of failure, don't you need me to remind you? Brian gave her a cold glare as his answer. Through 2 months of intermittent contact, he had long known that the perverted female drow in front of him liked his expression of gritting her teeth but feeling helpless. In the current situation, he can only choose to temporarily endure. Because he had already come up with a bold idea of how to take advantage of this opportunity and take down the opponent with a backhand. Very good, as long as you understand. The wizard chuckled twice and crossed his slender hands, reminding Brian. Remember, 1 month from now, it's time to test your abilities. You will be taken to the wilderness tunnels around the city to face your opponent. You must kill her in battle, only then can you get the antidote from her corpse, and then you can go anywhere you want. Brian's eyes lit up, revealing an expression of infinite hope in his heart, and a faint smile accompanied his lips. Although he knew that things were definitely not as simple as he imagined, he had to be careful and put on a look that made the other person happy. I can tell from your expression. The wizard noticed Brian's smile as she gazed at his face. My condition satisfies you very much, right? Indeed, Brian said slowly, suppressing the urge to turn his head. At this moment, he just wants to end the conversation quickly. In order to make you more motivated, I can fulfill a small long-awaited wish in your heart in advance, Janera said softly, walking towards him as if nothing had happened. I saw her casually wave, and the thin gauze draped over her moved along the graceful curve, automatically sliding down. The tight bra exposed her shoulders and half of her height. Then, she extended a slender black hand and forcefully lifted Brian's chin. Brian instinctively wanted to dodge, but a pair of fiery eyes were staring straight into his eyes. He could only curse a few words in his heart, trying to restrain this impulse and cater to it. He felt the unbridled female drow lean over, her graceful body already tightly pressed against him. At this moment, an irresistible magical force penetrated deep into his soul. He looked surprised and forced himself to remain calm, concentrate, and use the mind blank ability. In order to protect his secret, he immediately filled his mind with the purest hatred towards the Zhuo wizard. Dear Brian, tell me, what do you most want to do now? Janera stood on tiptoes, raised her arms high, and affectionately hugged his neck. Then, under the influence of the floating technique, she floated until their eyes could be level. Brian knew that under the influence of magic, he couldn't lie at this moment, so he looked at her with disgust on his face and fearlessly expressed his most genuine thoughts. I'll fuck your uncle. The witch was slightly stunned when she heard him curse with hatred. Immediately, a happy smile appeared, and in an instant, I forcefully pressed my crimson lips onto Brian's face, giving him a creepy, spider-like kiss. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Arcane Fire. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Arcane Fire. Brian opened his eyes, and his world was still the eternal, silent city of ancient Orence. Fortunately, after nearly 2 months of day and night study, he has become accustomed to living under candlelight and reading magic books. Moreover, he also possesses elf lineage, and the dim environment does not have as severe an impact on him as imagined. He checked his condition and saw that the spell positions and spiritual power points of the two professions, Warmage and Psychic Warlock, had all been restored after 8 hours of meditation. He then finished his state and stood up and walked towards the table. Meditation is the simplest way for the caster to perceive magic and exercise mental power. It looks no different from sitting still, and even doesn't require any specific posture. Its main purpose is to release the body and mind, gradually forget about the perception of the body, and then extend one's own will to the external energy to quietly feel. After 8 consecutive hours within a day, all the spell positions and spiritual power points consumed by him will be restored to saturation. That's also why when wizard apprentices become wizards, the first thing they need to do is learn to meditate. Restoration magic is just one of them. The main reason is to allow one's own spiritual power to actively perceive the magical network. When you successfully establish a connection between your spiritual power and the magic web during a long meditation, it means you have obtained the most basic casting permission. If the magic net is compared to a real-world electrical device, then the spellcasters who successfully come into contact with the magic net can be compared to a machine that successfully powers up and has the qualifications to operate. As for the speed of the machine's operation, it naturally depends on its personal strength. That is, the level of the caster's strength. It is obvious that machines with low power cannot withstand the impact of strong voltage, and even weak electricity cannot drive large machinery and equipment. The magic web serves as a mediator, allowing the appropriate amount of magical energy, electricity, to fit the appropriate crowd, machine, and prevent them from exploding and dying. Of course, the magic web has another function, which is to limit the caster's ability and prevent some powerful beings that even the gods fear from disrupting world balance. Simply put, it means helping a spellcaster with insufficient talent make it easier to cast spells, limiting the threat that gifted spellcasters pose to the realm of the gods. No matter how practitioners evaluate the pros and cons of the magic web, it is a very important thing for every caster. Without the existence of the magic web, the number of spellcasters in the entire world would be reduced by at least about 90%. As a traveler, Brian deeply understands this and is also a victim of it. In the small world he descended upon, it was a world that could not sense the magic web. Because of this, there were only a few spellcasters in the small world he left. Despite his efforts, he temporarily resolved the threat of the destruction of ancient evil creatures, causing the magic web to sense the existence of the small world and begin to move towards a normal trajectory. But he couldn't even calculate how long it would take to regain the freedom to cast magic like in the main material world. This is also one of the reasons why he tried to find ways to go to the main world. As a spellcaster, without the assistance of a magic web, everything you do seems to be at a loss, and there is no talk of saving the world. Of course, this does not mean that without a magic web, one cannot cast spells. In fact, many powerful spellcasters who want to go further on their path will spontaneously study the techniques of casting without the magic web. After all, in order to become a powerful presence in exploring the mysteries of the multiverse, one cannot avoid encountering many areas of deathly or frenzied magic caused by the distortion and deformation of the magic web. Even beyond the world of Torell, the endless worlds that are not covered by the magic web. At this point, the advantages of spellcasters with off-net casting skills will be fully demonstrated. This kind of off-net casting technique is naturally essential for travelers like him who used to be legendary spellcasters. If not, he wouldn't have been able to thrive in a place where even the magic web couldn't sense him, let alone come here. With this in mind, Brian sat down in a chair, his eyes slightly closed, his mind restrained, his thoughts cleared, and he was fully focused on feeling a blue and white flame with a diameter of about 1 inch inside his body. When he saw that the completion rate of the blue and white flames was 100%, he looked delighted and immediately activated the attributes of the flames. Arcane Fire. LV3 Arcane Energy. 2727, LV1 Features. Arcane Recall. After use, restores 50% of arcane energy, once every 3 days. Arcane Preparation. You can prepare a spell you have mastered in advance every day, which does not require any spells or actions. Arcane Hand. Those who are proficient in this spell can change the spell that originally had close contact to target within 30 feet, treating it as a ranged contact attack. LV2 features. Arcane Counterattack. Based on one's own intelligence and mastery of arcane knowledge, counter or rebound enemy spells. Arcane Burst. This ability allows you to consume additional arcane energy when releasing spells, attaching spell burst effects to spells, shaking enemies within range, and adding extra spell damage. LV3 features. Arcane Beam. Consumes arcane energy and releases a beam of arcane energy that comes into contact at a distance, causing damage to enemies. The damage increases according to the amount of arcane energy consumed. Seeing the restored arcane fire, Brian took a deep breath and arrived in this world. His heart, which had been hanging, finally settled peacefully. The arcane fire is the key to his casting of spells without the net. It is precisely because of this blue and white flame hidden deep in his soul and accompanying him here that he has the ability to cast spells even in a small world without a magic web. Simply put, possessing the arcane fire, he undoubtedly becomes a spellcaster who can cast spells without touching the magic web, also known as the blue bar mage by players. At this time, in addition to having the spell position of the main professional war mage, he also had an additional set of blue bars for releasing spells. Aohua. Originally a deep red flame developed by another advanced profession of wizards, the Great Mage. In order to obtain this flame, the Great Mage must permanently consume the energy equivalent to a 9-ring spell, that is, permanently reduce their own 9-ring spell position. Before Brian was reborn into this world, his profession was a legendary mage, naturally mastering the arcane fire ability of the mage. This improved version of the blue and white arcane fire is the product of his successful research on the technique of casting off the net. He is still deeply impressed by the production process of arcane fire. In the long river of time in the world of Torell. The continent of Fern, in the year of Dr. 1385 Blue Flame, an unprecedented catastrophe occurred. The Alpha Cataclysm. This is the third time in the history of the goddess of magic, Mystra, has fallen. As a result, the magic web is torn apart again, causing the most essential magical power to form a blue flame wave, which then ravages the entire continent of Farron like a plague. Although with the third resurrection of the magic goddess, the magic web was finally reluctantly repaired. However, the raging mysterious blue flames were never cleaned up from beginning to end, and even in some great rifts, a magical forbidden area was formed that burned blue flames. Even death zones around the world have emerged that have not yet been restored. The main material for Brian's improved arcane fire is the mysterious blue flame that he obtained by chance, representing the essential energy of the magic web. Subsequently, he removed the white silk threads representing the number of rings on the surface of the magic web, known as the magic web strings, and integrated them into the arcane fire. Finally, the goal is to connect this arcane fire with one's own spirit and transform it into a miniature magic web that is exclusive to oneself, which is the current type of arcane fire that emits blue and white flames. As his own level increases, the level of arcane fire can also reach up to level 10, allowing him to master the ability to release legendary spells within the 9 rings without a magic web, relying solely on arcane fire. Most importantly, after Brian successfully created the arcane fire, he developed a method to incorporate all the mysteries recorded in the spell book and all the magic he mastered in order to replace his own spell book with the arcane fire. After being reborn, he doesn't need to relearn the spells he once mastered. He only needs to activate the spell models stored in the arcane fire to release them. In this way, he can have a lot of time to study the spiritual abilities of spiritual sorcerers and the mysterious knowledge he has not yet explored. So, when Brian saw his fire finally waking up from silence, his heart was still very excited. The main reason why he has fallen to this place now is that at the moment he descended into this world, his own arcane fire clashed with the magic goddess Mystra's magic web, causing him to suddenly extinguish and lose his ability to release spells. And he happened to be teleported to the dark region by an Asmo wizard with unreliable teleportation spells, and ultimately fell into this field. Nowadays, the spells of the warmage profession have been linked to the magic web, obtaining a spell position. His arcane fire has also awakened after more than 2 months of silence, which means that his strength has basically recovered. However, Brian still has a small regret in his heart. The small world he was reborn into, the world consciousness, after he nodded and promised to save the world, bestowed upon him a divine-like power. However, as he left the original world, it suddenly fell silent in his body, and no matter how he adjusted it, there was no sign of awakening. Divine power is a divine power comparable to the gods. If he had not lost this ability at this time, not only could he escape from the secret room, but he could even use this power to forcibly lift the curse of the poisonous spider inside his body. It was precisely this change that made him realize the reason why the world will, after he readily agreed, gave him divine powers without hesitation. Obviously, if he intends to fully master the divine power, the prerequisite is to save the small world that is still threatened by ancient evil creatures. In fact, even without such conditions, Brian would still do his best to save it. Because it was a newborn small world, in addition to abundant resources and population, after considering future plans, he had planned to make it his rear base for future battles in other worlds. His purpose in coming to the main material world is to quickly enhance his strength while seeking ways to save the world. Of course, the prerequisite for all of this is to escape from the dark regions. At this moment, a faint echo echoed from the hollow impact of the heel on the rock. Brian's expression flickered, and he immediately realized that it was very likely that the person coming was someone mentioned to him yesterday by the Zol wizard Joranna, who was preparing to teach him how to deal with the Zol girl Sandilla. At this thought, his expression turned cold and he closed the book directly. From Janara's mouth, it was learned that her daughter was not only Sandra's friend, but also a drow wizard with magical talent second only to her. That is to say, this Zhuo wizard named Sandilla almost meets all the conditions for the cause of the internal competition of the Zhuo race, and it is no wonder that people have to work so hard to deal with her. It's worthy of being a plastic sisters, Brian said casually. He is well aware of his current situation, but this does not mean that he is truly at the mercy of others. Brian admitted that it was difficult for Janara, a 4th-level drow wizard, to resist, but her daughter was different. The old one cannot fight, but he is still very confident when dealing with a small one. Based on his understanding of the drow elves, he did not believe that this father-loving and filial mother-daughter would truly be a loving family. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Soul Piercing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Soul Piercing. The heavy stone gate was pushed open by an invisible force. A graceful figure gradually emerged in the darkness. Brian sat on the chair behind the stone table, didn't get up, just raised his head and casually looked over. Against the backdrop of the flames, the first thing he saw was the graceful walking posture of this drow elf, full of elegance and confidence, no less impressive than any supermodel he had ever seen at a fashion show. Moreover, the killing and coldness emanating from every move and gesture seemed to belong only to the warriors who had experienced countless battles. The fact is exactly so. Don't underestimate any female drow from the dark region. Both the wizard and Rose's priestess are not as delicate as they appear on the surface. The strength of these female droids, whether on or under the bed, is equally formidable. Brian also accidentally learned that in the dark city of the drow elves, half of the courses at the Spider Academy used to cultivate Rose priests were dedicated to practicing close combat skills. Otherwise, how could those priestesses who had lost their magical abilities suppress the rebellion of the male drow during the brief period of slumber after the spider god? The dim candlelight gradually brought the appearance of the female drow into his sight. A loose black robe is hard to conceal her proud figure, a cold and slightly seductive delicate face, dark yet elastic and glossy skin, and shiny long hair, all of which indicate her identity to Brian. Looking at this beautiful female drow like a surface elf, Brian saw in her red eyes that were about to grow to the top of her head, as if she were a soulless survivor. Sometimes he couldn't help but wonder what kind of lifestyle could thrive and grow in such a dark and evil place. Even though he has experienced many dangers and hardships in his life, he still finds it difficult to understand the life in the dark region. How can he live in such a deep and oppressive place for a lifetime? In his view, the dark region is an unbearable place, not only stealing a person's hope, but also imprisoning their souls, causing the creatures here to gradually lose their will, like walking corpses. However, these chaotic thoughts were not something he should consider, as he clearly felt himself being stared at by a pair of malicious eyes. "Stand up." The female drow who walked into the stone chamber frowned tightly and coldly examined Brian sitting in the chair. Brian didn't reply, just put down the magic book in his hand and looked at her calmly. From the moment he saw the other person at first glance, he understood that this was a female drow trying to tame him with her high position. He knew that in addition to deterring himself, the other party also wanted to test his strength. Obviously, this idea definitely came from her mother Jonera. Since that's the case, he doesn't mind satisfying their curiosity. After all, Brian never imagined that the other party would faithfully give him the antidote. "You despicable and inferior male slave, haven't you heard what I said?" Feeling the calm and composed demeanor of the half-elf slave, the female drow was ignited with anger, and her graceful voice became exceptionally sharp. Her right hand unconsciously grasped a finely carved spider-patterned whip hanging around her waist. Brian is too lazy to pay attention to her small movements. He has even seen Rose's terrifying snake whip, so how could he be afraid of such a weapon? "Your mother should have told you about the causes and consequences of the entire incident." He met the slightly twisted face of the opponent and calmly said, "In my opinion, guidance is unnecessary. All you need to do is make a list of all the spells that Santilla has mastered for me. As a wizard, if you know all the spells and cards of your opponent, your chances of winning in magical battles against opponents with similar strength will increase by at least half." Although Brian is not optimistic about this duel, he still needs to make some preparations. If a woman with eyes on her head were to teach, he might as well go figure it out on his own. Moreover, he did not believe that the other party's magical skills could be very high. After all, she is still too young and tender. He can even determine her approximate age from the tone of the other person's voice and angry gaze. Impulsiveness, irritability, jealousy, psychological distortion, and other negative emotions are a necessary part that every young drow must go through in the chaotic teachings of Rose, the queen of the spider god. When they truly understand how to restrain their emotions and hide their most genuine thoughts, they have already developed a mentality like spiders weaving webs and patiently waiting for prey. As for those who couldn't learn, they ultimately paid a heavy price. That's why the droids in the dark regions have the best conditions, but their population has never been able to rise. Seeing Brian's calm demeanor, the drow elves couldn't help but be taken aback by his angry and embarrassed expression. She looked at the half-elf slave in front of her with the unique gaze of a dark elf, as if sensing her extraordinary gaze. The other person's mouth slightly curled up, revealing a hint of a smile. Even as a dark elf, she had to admit that this man was very good-looking, and he had a cool smile. But soon, the dark elf felt a cold chill flying over her back, as if her instinct had anticipated some danger. She gritted her teeth, suppressing the anger that surged in her heart due to ignoring, and said coldly, "I'm not surprised by your stubbornness, despicable male. Soon, I'll show you how to comply with your master's commands." This is the city of Old Orleans, ruled by dark elves, and she does not believe that this seemingly intelligent slave will spare his life to resist her. The more proud the slave is, the stronger the sense of accomplishment in completely taming him. She rubbed the handle of the barb whip, feeling a faint anticipation in her heart. Brian had anticipated it earlier. He leaned forward, crossed his fingers on the table, smiled and looked at each other, his deep eyes shining brightly. As soon as the drow elf raised her long whip, she suddenly felt a palpitating energy rush into her mind like a pointed cone. Her expression was startled, and she nervously tightened her nerves, constantly guarding against sudden attacks from the other party for no reason. Soul-piercing. Brian's mind moved, and the spiritual energy seeping through the void suddenly transmitted to the depths of her mind along the tense thinking path of the drow elf. A swift and heavy blow, like a sharp steel needle, fiercely pierced her fragile brain like a tofu block. Ah! The mournful screams echoed through the enclosed stone chamber. Suffering from Brian's spiritual blow, the drow elves collapsed on the ground, holding their heads in both hands. Their slender fingers were deeply entangled in messy hair, and their tightly locked foreheads were already sweating profusely. Under the candlelight, they shimmered with a crystal-clear glow. Seeing his achievements, Brian nodded in satisfaction. The psychic abilities of a psychic do not require casting postures, spells, and casting materials like arcane spells. They only need to concentrate and use their minds to control the energy surging deep in their hearts. With the guidance of their eyes or some kind of guide, they can successfully unleash their abilities. So, while Brian's psychic abilities may seem to be released quickly and accurately, it was actually because he had already focused and prepared in advance that he caught the other person off guard. Moreover, the more spiritual power points a soul sorcerer consumes, the stronger their power becomes. Originally, the first level, soul piercing, only required 1 point of spiritual energy, but the spiritual energy he was preparing to unleash consumed 2 points without reservation. The power caused can be imagined. Generally speaking, the more severe the emotional fluctuations of the enemy, the stronger the power caused by spiritual spells. Similarly, the emotional fluctuations of soul sorcerers also determine whether they can successfully unleash their abilities. That's why most psychics like to maintain the most rational and calm mindset. Because doing so can make them very fluent and free when casting spiritual spells. Seeing that the drow was about to recover from the agony of his soul, Brian dared not delay his time. He quickly whispered a spell and reached out to the wall of the stone chamber. In an instant, the cold walls shimmered with faint blue light. I saw the sticky spider silk on the wall that he had used secondary creation techniques to make, all of which were activated by magic, continuously shooting out tough spider silk, tightly wrapping the limbs of the sudden Zhuo wizard. Let her struggle in vain on the web like a 4-clawed spider with open teeth and claws. Dare to hit me, you're playing with fire, male. The young drow elf gave up resistance, calmed down, and lifted his chin arrogantly. With a crimson gaze, he looked at him maliciously, you rotten maggot. If you're willing, you can kill me or torture me, but do you really dare? It seems like you can't help it anymore. Brian stood up from the chair, lowered his eyes, and looked at the bound Zhuo in front of him with a smile. In that case, we may have many common topics between us. With Brian's words, the female drow saw several black tentacles condensed from shadow energy under the firelight, twisted and swaying like venomous snakes in the shadow behind this half-elf slave. You. This is. As she gazed at the constantly moving tentacles emerging from the shadows in front of her, the female drow's face instantly stiffened. As a drow wizard, she certainly knew what it was, and at this moment, there was a hint of subconscious fear in her eyes as she looked at Brian. But soon she regained her senses, snorted coldly, lifted her head arrogantly, and looked at the half-elf slave in front of her with disdainful eyes. I thought you would be an interesting male, but you turned out to be just a male dog in heat. Humph, slave, you can do whatever you want with me, but if you think this will make me submit, it's simply foolish. She gave a cold smile and said, don't worry, any harm you have caused me today will be twice. 10 times back to you. Really? Then you should have read this book. Brian picked up a book from the table and looked at the female drow wrapped in spider silk in front of him, curiously saying. The book, Shadow Energy 7, provides a detailed explanation of the knowledge of tentacle art. If I let this bunch of tentacles go, let them go. Any part of your body that can penetrate, what do you think these cold tentacles made up of shadow energy would taste like? Brian spoke softly, but in this sealed stone chamber, he was heard very clearly, even with a faint echo. If you dare to do this, Mother Johnera won't let you go. You're looking for death. The female drow's expression changed, and she couldn't pretend anymore. A hint of obvious panic and fear floated in her crimson eyes. How about giving it a try? Brian looked at every part of her body, up and down, with some depth in his mind. In fact, when he saw the detailed introduction of knowledge about tentacles in this book, he thought these female drows were all good at it. Until now, he realized that they were also afraid at times. This move should not be useful for those old drivers, he couldn't help but think maliciously. Don't mess around, I'll cooperate with you. Being scrutinized by the other party's unbridled gaze, the drow elf finally panicked. She lowered her proud head, feeling as if she were a slave, and gritted her teeth in a resentful voice, saying, "You will regret what you did today. That's about it. If I had said that earlier, there wouldn't have been so much to do." Seeing that his intimidation had a good effect, Brian took out a sheepskin scroll, picked up a feather pen, and began recording all the information and spells about Sandilla that the female drow had revealed to him. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Rebel Joyer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Encounter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Encounter. A slight popping sound warned Brian that someone had broken through the restriction of the stone chamber. Although setting restrictions in this restricted stone chamber was undoubtedly unnecessary, he still set up an extra one out of a good habit he had developed in his daily life. He lifted his eyes from the book and gave a cold glance in the direction of the sound. The door of the stone chamber was sealed by magic, and he knew a spell to unlock the seal. If he is willing, he can even escape effortlessly. But he had self-awareness, and his current situation did not force him to choose this path. As his gaze turned towards the direction of the sound, he was surprised to find that it was not as he had imagined. After the prohibition was triggered, a slightly imperceptible blue and white energy wave would surge out of the stone door. A hint of confusion climbed onto his gradually solemn face. He forcibly remained calm, but his heart was rapidly pondering what intruder had appeared in the room. From the motionless stone gate, it could be seen that the ordinary person lurking in the dark was using some kind of magic, and the empty room made him understand that the intruder was proficient in advanced hiding techniques. At this thought, Brian's brow furrowed slightly. He found that with his own perception and the sharpness bestowed upon him by his elf bloodline, he could not find any trace. If it weren't for his unnecessary imposition of a prohibition, he could even imagine that he might not have figured out how he died. That is to say, someone maintained invisible magic and quietly infiltrated his room. So, what is the purpose of this enemy? Brian's two eyebrows immediately tightened, and he was ready for battle, unconsciously hiding one hand under the table, ready for deadly spells at any time. Suddenly, a bright energy ball circled the sharp turn of the bookshelf and rushed towards him. Brian, who had already been prepared, almost entered a combat state at the moment when the energy ball appeared. Star Mass Barrier. He put down the book in his hand and sat on the chair without moving a single penny. In a state of high concentration, a light blue energy barrier suddenly appeared. The biggest feature of creative soul sorcerers is to draw energy from the star realm, summon or protect themselves. The most typical abilities include interstellar constructs, interstellar creepers, interstellar protective membranes, and interstellar protective barriers. And his interstellar barrier is a magical ability that can only be mastered by soul sorcerers who are proficient in creation to resist magical damage. And during casting, as long as you are highly focused, you will not consume any spiritual power points. Although the power of the protective barrier is minimal without consuming additional power points. But through his spell recognition ability, Brian can feel that the spell attacking him is not as deadly as he imagined. That is to say, the enemy's attack is more like a probe, or rather, it has no intention of taking his life. Thinking of this, Brian vaguely guessed some possibility. Bang! Like the gentle sound of crushed stones falling onto the lake's surface, the bright energy ball splashed several ripples on the light blue barrier, eventually dissipating and disappearing. Almost as soon as the energy ball disappeared, Brian, who was on high alert, quickly stood up and let the chair behind him fall. Without hesitation, he lowered his head and rolled forward along the table to the ground, barely avoiding two rushing darts. Two cross-shaped darts collided with the stone wall, creating bright sparks in the piercing collision, falling to the ground. Brian secretly wiped away a cold sweat, and as he stood up, he immediately checked the enemy attacking him. I happened to see a slender female drow emerge from the shadows. She was wearing a black magic cloak and her arms were waving a series of complex gestures at an extremely fast speed. Brian saw the crackling energy condensing at her fingertips and then turned into a magical energy arrow rushing towards her. When the energy left the hands of the drow, it illuminated her beautiful face covered by her long hair, as well as a pair of very unique blue eyes in the drow race. How did she appear here? Brian's expression was taken aback. He gave up his plan to try to counterattack and quickly mobilized his spiritual energy to strengthen the defense strength of the protective ability, Starry Barrier. Because he came up with a simpler way to deal with it. This is a meaningless magical battle, and he doesn't want to spend most of his energy here. After all, on the second day, he will face a severe test that concerns his own life's safety, so when he is certain that his life is safe, he is prepared to stop it. Brian saw himself being hit by a magical energy arrow, and small lightning kept jumping on his body, bursting into brilliant electric sparks. As he expected. This level of attack cannot cause any harm to him at all. Immediately afterwards, he felt the fourth attack prepared by the drow wizard in advance. More than a dozen tough spider threads shot out from the ceiling of the wall without warning, and he was caught off guard and tightly wrapped around most of his body, lying on the ground. Brian lay on the cold ground in surprise, struggling symbolically a few times before lifting his head and looking at his enemy. This is a young drow elf. Her black satin skin gives a living sculptural feeling, and the soft and tight black leather armor and ebony toned chain armor further enhance her image. Santila Pumor. Brian recognized the identity of the drow elf and also understood that the other person was his opponent for tomorrow. So, he doesn't want to have a meaningless confrontation with her today. Otherwise, his tactics are likely to be predicted in advance, and his chances of winning will become slim. Moreover, out of his understanding of her, he still had confidence that he could subdue her solely by his own physical means. This is also the fundamental reason why he did not continue to fight. He continued to gaze at the familiar face, which had a magical beauty and delicate and distinct features. Her thick white hair was as smooth as moonlight on new snow. Her face looked lively, sometimes mischievous, sometimes icy cold, with a pair of almond-shaped big eyes dominating her, and the color of her eyes resembling a deep blue sky. The rebellious daughter of the Zhuo family, a spoiled Princess Zhuo, with her unique personal style, searching for ways to escape social oppression. Brian recalled some experiences about this girl. He met the other party at Skull Harbor in Deepwater City. At that time, the rebellious drow who had fled underground was searching for the wandering temple of the dark girl Iris Chui in the mysterious city of Deepwater. During the period of the cataclysm, many shocking events occurred, and even the gods became high-risk professions. A huge change is inevitable in the dark regions. Dark girl Iris Chui. The only goddess who guards all kind drow elves. She fell in the battle of the Spider Queen, and all her followers were taken over by the elf lord, Torell. But there is a small group of drow elves who have maintained a steadfast faith from beginning to end, hidden in the strolling temple of Skull Harbor, preparing for the great plan to resurrect the goddess. Among the participants of this resurrection project, there is also a growing group of players. Some players even promote a slogan on the forum in order to mobilize group power. Although Iris Chui has fallen, she has always lived in our faith, seed. As for whether there is success or not, Brian is not quite sure. He only knew that the wandering temple hidden in the deep water city's underground maze had begun to surface, which meant that the resurrection plan had reached the most crucial step. The battle mage of the kingdom of Comer. Santilla lifted her chin and showed a proud smile, spinning around in front of Brian with frivolous steps. So, you came prepared. Brian snapped out of his mind and thought carefully before guessing the other person's true purpose. From the bright blue eyes of the drow elf, it can be seen that she came here out of curiosity, which also fits her personality. As for who was instructed or instigated, it is easy to guess. That's right, you speak Zhuo language quite proficiently. Sandilla kept her distance, then bent down and looked at Brian. Can you say a little more? I heard Hillen say that your yelling look is the most interesting. What does this mean? Brian pretended to be angry and said, do you want to find an excuse to hit someone? If you want to hit someone, just let me know. I have seen your preferences in the area of drow elves for a long time, so just vent your excess energy. Taking advantage of the other person's distraction, he quietly utilized his psychic secondary creation technique to create a tool to help him escape. I also really want to give you 2 punches up close and see your painful expression. Sandilla flashed her long eyelashes and smiled, but I know your little bit of caution, so I will use ranged spells to solve you. As you wish. Brian shrugged nonchalantly and said, as you please, you shouldn't miss a target that is tied up and motionless. Sandilla was surprised by the indifference of the other party. She stared at him, straightened her waist and back, stretched out her slender fingers, and said eagerly. Yes, I won't miss. My magic hits every shot, but I can guarantee that you won't be killed by the first spell, and neither will the second. I will work hard to ensure that you can feel your own death. Do you still want to give it a try? As long as you're happy, Brian smiled at her. Very good, very good. Sandilla gazed at Brian with a relaxed smile on her face. She was stunned for a moment, then praised her. Since you understand the drow language, you must know that the underworld is ruled by the drow elves, so according to the rules we have established and the assurance given to me by Hillen, I now declare that your life belongs to me, and I happen to need a new slave. Brian was too lazy to inquire about what Hillen had promised her. He twisted his body and lay on the ground in a comfortable position. He casually replied, that's my honor, esteemed lady. How do you plan to take me away? Is it elegantly carried on your shoulder? Well, it's really a bit difficult to handle. Sandilla frowned as she looked at Brian, who was entangled in spider silk. Okay, you can loosen the spider silk on my legs and I'll walk back with you. Brian offered her advice, what do you think? Or, in fact, you're worried that you won't be able to beat a wizard with bound hands. If that's the case, TSK, I have nothing to say. A good proposal, Santira nodded slightly. She played with a string of silver necklaces hanging on her chest, deliberately causing them to shimmer with a faint magical luster. Then she looked at him cautiously, feeling still uneasy, and threatened to say. You'd better not play any tricks, otherwise I'll show you my tricks. Brian looked at the magical accessory that Santilla deliberately showed him and felt the dangerous magical energy. His eyelids couldn't help but jump. I want to live a little longer, he said with a cooperative expression on his face. The drow elf nodded slightly and then bent down, ready to loosen the spider silk bound to his legs. Brian saw the other person's necklace hanging right above his head. His gaze flickered, and he immediately tightened his muscles. He stood up suddenly, slamming his entire face into her chest, and took the opportunity to open his mouth and bite her necklace with his teeth. Then, he curled up his legs, pulled hard, and turned to the side. Suddenly caught off guard, Sandilla let out a scream, her slender body suddenly losing balance and falling onto him. Brian twisted his body like a fish, pressing her under him, and then forcefully tilted his head back, slamming his forehead against the precisely raised forehead. Under the intense impact, Santilla's back of the head collided with the hard ground again, causing a second additional injury. She let out a painful cry, and Brian, the bookshelf and table in the stone room in her sight, began to dance gracefully. Brian also felt a sharp pain on his forehead. He forcibly kept his mind clear, and with a movement of his mind, he used magic to control a sharp blade that had formed in his hand, spinning rapidly to cut open the bound spider silk. When his body regained its freedom, he immediately withdrew and distanced himself from it. Lightning traction. Then, with a quick whisper, a magical whip leaping with lightning swept over. This magical rope skillfully wrapped around Sandilla, and the tiny lightning crackled, causing her to make a painful groan. Her struggling body lay back on the ground. "I'm really sorry, you were captured by a slave." Brian rubbed his slightly painful forehead and looked at the fierce-looking drow elf. "If you ask for mercy, maybe you're in a good mood and I'll let you go." The drow elves never beg for mercy. Sandilla shook off her long hair that blocked her sight and gasped for air due to pain. She proudly lifted her head, looked at Brian, and said without showing any weakness, not to mention bowing down to a male. "Perhaps you can create this trend," Brian threatened. "You dare not do anything to me." After calming down, Sandilla suddenly showed a meaningful smile and said, "Otherwise, Aunt Johnera would never let you go. Don't forget your identity." "It's you who won't let go," Brian thought to himself. Of course, such words cannot be said at this time. Because this will affect my plan to escape tomorrow. At the same time, he began to feel a hint of anxiety in his heart. Anxiously, why hasn't Johnera appeared yet? Hurry up and take this headache-inducing rebellious drow away. After all, he really dares not offend the other party too harshly. Otherwise, if we meet the next day with a dimensionality reduction blow, we won't even have time to cry. This is the reason why he is least willing to associate with the drow elves. If you keep it too firm, you will leave a bad impression and even develop resentment, and your name will be blacklisted in the notebook. If there is too much goodwill, it will make these drow elves who are good at plotting and scheming suspicious. So, this headache-inducing degree must be maintained in moderation. Indeed, your statement sounds more convincing, Brian pretended to submit. Sandilla, who was ready to counterattack, looked at Brian, who was disheartened, in surprise. She felt that this half-elf from the surface was more intelligent than she had expected, and enslaving such creatures almost made her feel a bit ashamed. Her eyes flickered a few times and she said cautiously, "To be honest, falling into Aunt Janara's hands is undoubtedly waiting to die. It seems like a bit of waste." When Brian was mentioned about his pain point, he pretended to be unhappy and let out a cold snort. Upon seeing this, Santira blinked and gave him the most charming smile, saying in a moving soft voice, "This is a dark place, a terrifying land. It's impossible to live alone, let alone become a prisoner. Perhaps we can have a good conversation. What's there to talk about?" Brian cautiously took 2 steps forward, looking down at her with a look of interest. "You are a semi-elf from the surface and a spellcaster." "I want to learn more about the surface," Santira said candidly. "If you are willing to cooperate with me, I can take you away. Knowledge is a good thing." Brian nodded in agreement and then said with a wary expression, "But as you mentioned earlier, I understand the Zhuo language and naturally have a deep understanding of the unique culture of your dark regions. In my hometown, travel and adventure are our traditional culture, but in your blind exclusivity and strict hierarchy of the ancient city of Orence, a drow who is interested in the surface is, in my opinion, a completely deviant existence, and such people often do not live long. Travel and adventure are actually your traditional culture. It's unbelievable that someone encourages their young people to travel and adventure," said Sandilla, grasping another key point in her words with an envious expression on her face. "Do you know Deepwater City?" She looked at Brian with anticipation. Deepwater City. I didn't expect the other party to already know about Deepwater City at this time. There was a hint of surprise in Brian's gaze as he looked at the Zhuo girl. "Of course I know," he briefly said, "that is one of the core areas of the continent, known as the Land of Glory. In Deepwater City, there was once a god who died, a god who was resurrected, and a mortal who was deified there. The population of a city is enough to match that of a kingdom. You even know Deepwater City? Brian looked at the Zhuo girl with a meaningful gaze. Does that mean you've been to the surface world? That's a terrifying place. Santira nodded with a gloomy expression. Every day, a huge fireball jumps into the air on the ground, emitting a dazzling light that is even more dazzling than the dazzling light used by Rose's priests to punish sinners. Even at night, when the fireball falls below the ground level, no one can escape the indescribable terror on the ground. Countless small bright spots, sometimes even a smaller silver fireball, will shatter the peaceful dark sky, making it impossible to forget the punishment that will come the next day. Is this your first feeling? Brian asked in a skeptical tone. No, Santira shook her head slightly. This is what my fellow countrymen who have never seen the surface world have described to me. You said you've been there once, what do you think? I'm not quite sure. The Zhuo girl lowered her head, letting her thick long hair cover her face, and then the corner of her eye stared at Brian's face, saying in a mournful tone. When I was 5 years old, my mother took me to the surface of the earth. I only remember coming to a pond and seeing many large round leaves floating on the water, with many small green creatures sitting on top. The creatures looked a bit like fat round lizards. For a while, I listened to them sing because in the dark areas, lizards never sing. Lotus leaves and frogs. According to the description of the Zhuo girl, Brian came up with a very fitting creature. And then what? Then my mother was killed by the underground compatriots who were chasing after me, and I was also taken back by them. Sandra's voice was light, and her thin shoulders seemed to tremble uncontrollably with sad sobs. Brian gave her a pitiful glance and was about to speak when he suddenly noticed that her eyes were dry and flickering with a cunning blue light. When he realized all of this, it was already too late. A soft bang, like the sound of some kind of alchemy potion exploding. The entire enclosed stone chamber was suddenly enveloped in a substance like darkness. Feeling the darkness in front of him, Brian's expression changed and he quickly calmly propped up his defensive field, ready to respond to Sandilla's surprise at any time. However, the imagined attack did not come, but a crisp voice full of mockery. Cunning half-elf, I keep my word. I swear on Rose's 8th leg that I will come and buy you when I finish tomorrow's coming-of-age ceremony. The darkness gradually dissipated, and upon seeing the disappearing drow, Brian breathed a sigh of relief. He savored the sentence left by the other party before leaving, and suddenly felt that his chances of escaping had once again increased significantly. Well done, at least not exposing your strength and ideas. A cold voice came from behind without warning. Brian had long been accustomed to the unexpected appearance of the other party, so he didn't pay attention. He said expressionlessly, "Don't tell me, this is an unexpected coincidence." In fact, Janera, the drow wizard, leisurely walked up to him, and Hillen followed behind with her head down. She looked straight into Brian's eyes and said coldly, "This is indeed a coincidence." As soon as she finished speaking, she reached out and slapped Hillen loudly, shouting, "Fool! You almost ruined my plan, get lost." Hillen covered her slightly swollen purplish-red cheeks and left the room without saying a word. Tomorrow, at the appropriate time, you will be taken to a tunnel in the wilderness. As part of the preparation, I will give you a detailed map and useful magical equipment. Remember, if you want to survive, do as I say, the wizard warned coldly before suddenly disappearing like when he arrived. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Meeting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Meeting. As Santilla passed through the jagged and dark spire, she was not amazed by the etched magical runes on it for the first time, or stopped for a long time to observe. For the first time, she didn't go to a team of Zol patrols riding underground lizards, through a prank spell, and watched them look disheveled when their mounts overturned. She even passed an elegant shop which was shrouded in gorgeous demon fire, selling perfume, soft silk coats, magic ornaments and other wonderful little things. She did not give a glance of longing. At this moment, the faint pain emanating from the forehead and back of the head seemed to constantly remind her not to forget that unfamiliar figure. What are these compared to him? She rubbed the wound on her forehead in confusion. Sandilla has occasionally seen surface humans or semi-elves in the market. They are a minority of warriors, but like most of the drow elves of the same class, she sees these merchants as parasites and never deals with them. She has never been so close to surface residents before, let alone having a long conversation with him. Undoubtedly, this battle mage from the surface world, if we ignore his eyes and only look at his appearance, is a very young semi-elf. Even if calculated based on human lifespan, his age is similar to or even older than hers. The half-elf is 1 head taller than her, he looks taller and stronger than most drow men. Of course, this strength does not refer to brainless creatures like orcs and ogres, who have large, muscular bodies. There are many humans with strong physique, and their muscle contours are more exaggerated than those of battle mages. However, in Santilla's view, there are very few people who are as evenly and sturdy as him. When she loses balance and presses on the other person's body, she could clearly feel the well-developed small muscle blocks in the other person's chest and abdomen, as well as the steady and powerful heartbeat. This inevitably makes her own heart beat faster. Who would have thought that what she received was a fierce collision on her forehead, as well as a strong pain from the back of her head hitting the ground after falling on her back, which almost made her faint. However, none of these are important. In Sandra's mind, what truly impressed her was the pair of eyes, deep and bright, like the brightest black stones on the altar of a blood sacrifice ceremony. The most crucial thing is that when she pretended to mourn her experiences in order to escape, she saw a kind of pity that she had almost forgotten in her deep black eyes. Is he feeling sorry for me? Sandilla couldn't believe everything she saw in her eyes, she even doubted if she had misread. It's hard to imagine a cunning half-elf making a mistake due to an emotion that makes their drow elves despise it. She furrowed her brow in confusion, her forehead hit by the half-elf, and a sudden pain came from it, making the image in her mind inexplicably clearer. She still remembered that he had a messy cut of black hair, with a slightly pale complexion, shining brightly under the candlelight in the stone room. Anyway, the battle mage from the kingdom of Kamal looks both strong and intelligent, as well as compassionate. The city of Gualens cannot tolerate sympathy. Subconsciously, she believes that what allows most races to coexist peacefully is not fear, but compassion. She suddenly began to appreciate this quality that she had long forgotten and despised, even though he belonged to a lower race. Moreover, he is also an experienced adventurer who can definitely tell her more about Deepwater City and Skull Harbor. Perhaps finding a way to keep him by your side would be more enjoyable. Sandilla absent-mindedly played with a strand of white hair hanging on her chest, and before she knew it, she had returned to her room. She sat at the desk, threw a few burnt candle holders aside, lit a new candle, and began flipping through books and scrolls. Tomorrow is her long-awaited coming-of-age ceremony, and she needs to carefully match the spells she has learned in order to quickly complete her hunting ceremony. However, what made her frustrated was that despite her wholehearted efforts, she still couldn't focus her craving attention on spell learning as usual, and the details of interacting with battle mages kept replaying in her mind. She recalled sneaking into the secret room where the half-elf was imprisoned and seeing him at first glance. He sat quietly at his desk, like a grey dwarf digging for secret silver, diligently nibbling on the mountains of books and scrolls. That serious and focused look actually attracted her a bit. Especially his pitiful gaze always returned to her mind, as if a continuous and lingering melody. A long sigh. Sandilla pushed all the scrolls she had planned to read aside. She stood up from the chair and casually threw away the droll cloak draped over her body. Then he threw himself on the bed, intending to take a break. She needs to rest to face the upcoming day. She hugged the silk pillow, but drowsiness couldn't fall on her. Suddenly, she looked startled and jumped out of bed. A person stood silently in front of her like a ghost. Even after so many years, his sudden appearance still left her mentally and physically exhausted. He definitely did it intentionally, she thought with hatred. Sandilla quickly put on an expression she had rehearsed countless times in front of the mirror. This is a casual smile and a cynical gaze. The life of a drow elf is full of complex conspiracies, but in Sandra's view, there is nothing more complex than her feelings for her own drow father. She worships and hates, admires and fears, hates and longs for her father. It's hard to imagine that these different emotions exist simultaneously. Moreover, what saddens her even more is that no emotion has received even the slightest response. At least, the half-elf she met today, whom she had never met before, could still feel pity for her, and he would never. To her, the chief mage of the ancient city of Orence was a completely enigmatic existence. Hers of Pumor was her biological father, but the drow elves were a matrilineal society. The chief mage violated tradition and forced her to leave the first family, Tux, to become a homeless person like him. And then he absurdly left her to be raised by the first family on his behalf. For this, she paid the heaviest price in her life. Every time I see him. She seemed to hear the screams of those protesting against betrayal, murder, and other atrocities, intertwined with the fierce howls of the high-ranking priests who led the drow elf society. These voices have been echoing in her mind, always occupying a place, especially the screams of dying children on the surface. Before her death, her mother told her that there was a mysterious city hidden deep underground in Deepwater City. As long as she found the walking temple, many drow elves who longed to return to the surface could be redeemed. So, deep inside her, there has always been a dream of venturing to the surface. Santira quickly regained her senses and began to ponder why Hadra Pumor wanted to see her now. She hasn't received any news from him for 3 years. Although his servants would occasionally pay for the support and education of the Tucker family, and ensure that she always had a bulging wallet when she occasionally went to the market. But in Sandilla's view, such a private meeting could only mean trouble. But what did she do? Or, more precisely, was her behavior of causing trouble discovered and reported again? She began to seriously consider what kind of deviant behavior she had recently engaged in, and which Priestess Rose's prank spell had provoked, to the point where he had to personally take action to resolve it. Then, she thought of a new possibility. After the blood sacrifice, she will become a true drow. Perhaps he thinks she deserves attention. So she casually lifted her head and looked at him. He looked as old as he remembered, a droll male with strangely pale pupils that were almost indescribable and looked distressing. In Sandilla's impression, his lifespan exceeded 10 centuries. It is said that as the chief mage, he watched his family's downfall helplessly and remained indifferent. She firmly believes in this. Because he personally killed her mother in order to get her out of the Tucker family. We're meeting again. The voice of the chief mage was so soft that she had to listen quietly. Indeed. Sandilla replied playfully, but your way of meeting is still so unique. Sometimes I wonder if you used to be worried about your mistress when you were young, so your appearance always caught people off guard. She stared tightly into his eyes. To her disappointment, she couldn't see anything. Keep these words to tempt the guards at the entrance. The Grand Master calmly said, as you imagine, I came for your blood sacrifice. Now, I will stay here until the festival begins because you have too much to learn and the preparation time is too short. I have been preparing all along, and I have plenty of time, she said coldly, suppressing her resentment. Naive children, becoming a drow is far more than just participating in a brutal massacre. The great mage said with a gloomy expression, if I guess correctly, John Eratux must be skilled in this skill. Sandilla recognized the meaningful words and felt a bit reluctant to face this reality. She couldn't believe Aunt Johnera would betray her. The magic godmother raised her and gave her the care and indulgence that most young drows would never dream of. In addition to her biological mother, she not only gave her life, but also gave her 10 years of warmth, security, and even love. It was Aunt Janara's indulgence that made her the most free and unrestrained drow in Old Orleans. You are doubting my judgment. The Grand Master's calm gaze flashed with a hint of coldness. You don't really think it was a great adventure, do you? Well, I'm starting to feel a bit hopeless about your judgment. So what? Santira said almost in despair. If it was really as he told her, then she wouldn't dare to think about the battle mage from the kingdom of Comer anymore. Stupid child, I don't want you to be harmed in any way. The great mage lifted his eyelids and carefully examined his lost daughter, saying gently. I will give you a magical item that allows you to easily kill your prey, fulfilling the literal requirements of the ritual. After all, you have never valued Rose's 8th leg, have you? End of this chapter.